Okay, Wylau, Chair.
Diolch yn fawr iawn, Wyn, and croeso I pawb yma heddiw pnawn I cyfarfod Finance Panel, cyfarfod byr, gobeithio. Welcome everybody to the Finance Panel this afternoon, just to look at the amendment to the budget. Hopefully it'll be a fairly quick meeting. We've got a number of people here. I won't introduce them all, but it'll take longer than the meeting itself. So item one, apologies.
Only apology I've had chairs from Councillor James Gibson-Watt.
Diolch, Wyn. Declarations of interest. If I don't hear anything, I'll go on to declarations of party whips. Again, if I don't hear anything, I'll go straight on to item 4, amendment to proposed budget, which has been published. We will look at a couple of elements of this, not only the second point about the removal of the use of the general fund to fund the 278, and I'll also want to quick comment on the section 3 as well. So Jane, would you like to give a quick summary and how the money flows and what's been taken from where and given to who, etc., etc. Thank you.
Okay, so further to the Cabinet budget proposal, which was considered and approved on the 17th of January, which is then winging its way on to Council. There have been a couple of amendments, or a few amendments made to basically establish a £500,000 fund to support energy costs within schools and energy efficiency measures. And in releasing that funding, there were some other adjustments made to the budget. Some of those have already been to the various scrutiny committees for scrutiny, as they are relating specifically to those. But there is one element of this which relates to the setting aside of some budget, £287 worth of budget, to replenish the general fund reserve as a result of using the reserve to fund the pressures that we've seen from Freedom Leisure in this particular financial year. However, due to the Q3 position that's now been reported to Council, the outturn position for the current financial year has improved a little, and as a result of that, that Freedom Leisure pressure can be met from existing base budget rather than having to draw on reserves. So that meant that the budget we'd set aside to replenish reserves next year isn't needed to do so, and therefore that money has been diverted as part of this £500,000 fund.
Thank you, Jane. Just for my clarity, when the 287 was identified originally to support Freedom Leisure over that Christmas period, where did that come from originally?
It was anticipated that it would need to be drawn from reserves, but the virement wasn't actually done at that point in time. We were waiting to see what the final amount would be before an actual virement was actioned, but obviously that will still need to be done in terms of the budget virement itself in this current financial year, but we now don't expect to have to draw it from reserves.
Yes, so so in a way this sum of money's been wired from somewhere now, isn't it?
Yeah, it will be as soon as we know the amount.
Yes, from where?
Basically within the overall budget plan, so it'll either be from the risk budget or an underspend, I presume, on one of the other corporate budgets where we're seeing an underspend against capital charges, things like that. So it'll probably be a virement against one of those lines.
Okay, so there's no certainty yet. And is there a possibility that it'll have to come from reserves in the end?
Not now. We're not anticipating that it will do now. We're currently forecasting about £1 million underspend altogether on the budget plan. That doesn't include specific reserves, which we will draw on for certain elements of the budget. That's already approved. But this was just the element of the general fund. There's not anticipated to be a draw from the general fund now.
And not from the general fund, but other reserves. Yeah, okay. The £1 million underspend, there has been a draw on reserves to create that £1 million underspend, has there or not?
No, other than specific reserves, yes, but we set those reserves up at the end of last financial year in response to some of the pressures that we were starting to see coming through. So we will be drawing on specific reserves, but not the general fund.
Can you remind us what those reserves, specific reserves were? Sorry.
There will be several. They were some that were held by, well, within a service budget for the Precious Pay Award was one. We set aside a significant level of funding to meet the additional pay award for the current financial year. And there were some other specific service pressures, and I don't have the detail here now, but there's about 3 million in total, I think, coming from specific reserves.
Yes, okay. Okay. Yeah, everybody's very careful of making that distinction between general reserves and specific reserves, but it is one pot at the end of the day, isn't it?
It's part of the overall reserves pot, but yes, specifics are set up for specific purposes, aren't they? Where the general fund is more general.
Okay. Members of the panel who would like to question, or is this very clear to you? Any issues that arise from this extra provision for the education?
Councillor Peake,
No?
Councillor Peake.
Councillor Peake, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I suppose as a new councillor, but previous life was in accountancy, so I do have a little bit of experience there. But I do find this very confusing in terms of all the different reserves that are being used and how the money's being moved around. And I suppose without being too flippant, in one way it sort of strikes me a bit like an okey cokey budget, really, where there's one figure in and one figure out. If I looked at the 191,000 bullet point 3, I think my first question is why was an impact assessment not done in the first place? It seems like this was done subsequently. And then I guess I did hear what Jane was saying about the freedom leisure and the environment not needed. But again, I suppose coming to it slightly fresh, it just makes me wonder what else there may be around there that I don't know, we might be able to use or not use. So I suppose in a clumsy way, I'm just trying to say, has everything been thought through now, or is there potentially still later on other figures that may be moving around?
Shall I pick up? There's a couple of technical aspects to that, I think.
Please, Jane.
In terms of the impact assessment, there was an impact assessment for the initial £1 million. So there was one, and then there's a second one being completed now because of the increase by 191,000. So there was an impact assessment for each. In terms of reserves, yes, it can be a little confusing in terms of specifics and general fund. I'm happy, Councillor Peake, to sit down and go through that with you in detail if you want a little bit more information around that. I would say in terms of any budget, it's an estimate. Things do move and flex during the year, and you do get opportunities that arise during the year, even when a budget has been set. And no doubt in terms of the estimate that we've got for next year, I can't guarantee everything will come in exactly on the pound and the penny that we set at the beginning of the year, but that's the nature of budgets. I hope that helps answer some of your question.
Yes, it did. Thank you, Jane. And yes, when you do have some time, I would like to take you up on your kind offer about the reserve. So thank you for that.
Okay.
Arwell.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure. I'm not quite sure. Well, Jane can tell me if it's the right meeting or not, really. Yeah, with the extra 500,000 now going to schools to help with the extra energy cost, how is that going to be allocated to India? Is it going to be allocated to every school as a proportion, or is a school with a surplus budget not going to have it? And or should I ask that to the education scrutiny? Or I'm not sure.
I think In terms of the detail around that, and I think this was fed back to the Learning and Skills Committee,
Right.
that detail does need to be worked up. So this is setting aside a provision for that fund. But that committee did ask to have some involvement in terms of determining the specific criteria around it. But at the moment, as part of the proposal here at the moment, it is not proposed that that is distributed via the formula. It
Right.
is held back separately from that. But I think, you know, there's been a lot of input from various committees, which Cabinet will have to consider now before it formally proposes its final budget.
Okay, thank you, Jane. I'll go to the chair of the Education Scrutiny, and okay, thank you for that. Thank you, Aled.
Diolch, Arwel. Yes, just to follow up on that, you were drawing up the criteria towards the end of this financial year, end of March. You were suggesting. Can I just confirm that that £500,000 will not be used to just to give to schools to help them balance their budget? It will be so for all capital projects which will reduce energy usage in the long term. Otherwise, people may suggest that the reserves are being used to keep council tax low.
I mean, that fund will be directed to most appropriate method to schools. It's not my intention. I won't formalise the criteria until that's done, but it's not my intention that that's just distributed to support schools that are currently in deficit. It has to be done on a very clear set of criteria so that we make sure that schools are taking every action they possibly can themselves without having to draw on any other fund.
So it will have long-term benefit, not just one-off balancing of budgets in 1 year.
If it's directed to energy efficiency measures, then yes, it will be longer term.
Okay, thank you. Just to go back very quickly to the HDR one. The previous committee, I was just looking at their papers. I failed to join in time. The meeting was over before I arrived. But the impact assessment there, I could only see one impact assessment.
No, there's a second one being done for the increase.
But it hasn't been done yet.
No, it has been done. Well, I've received it. I received it on the day of the amendment. So I think it's been published for the committee that scrutinised that particular element. I can check though. But it will be included in the budget pack, obviously, when it's finally released.
Yes, but it doesn't look as though it was included.
It was sent out, I thought, Chair.
Sorry?
I thought it was sent out with the papers. It was late, but we sent it out as a supplementary paper to the Economy Committee for the last meeting.
Okay. I'm looking at that now. And it does say within it, this will be a one-off saving delivering by diverting revenue monies that the service pays into the fleet replacement budget to pay for the replacement vehicles into a HTR savings budget. It's not, is it? It's going into the education budget.
That's what this proposal is now for the 191,000. Yes.
So it will have a negative impact on the HTR because they've got 191k less budget next year, haven't they?
They were giving that up into the transport reserve previously, so it goes into that reserve. But yes, it is coming from the HTR service. But
yeah, whether it's in the reserve or not, it remains in the HTR budget, doesn't it? So it is reducing the HTR budget
for that year, yes.
For that year. I'm slightly surprised that the impact assessment wasn't, unless I've made a mistake, unless somebody can show it to me, but I can only see the one impact assessment, which is the wrong one for the 191k. But that may be by it's Monday 13th of Feb. Amendment to budget proposals 2023-24, pages 3 to 10, supplementary pack, and it's as I read out just that one thing. So I'm slightly surprised at the scrutiny group didn't draw that out. Right, okay, apologies. Back to, I was going to say back to the proposed amendment. Do we have any comments on the rest of the proposed amendments? No, I was just slightly surprised to follow up on Councillor Pete's comments, really. That's number 2 in the proposed amendment is at 120k for older day provision. I assume that's been scrutinized, but as he said, is just you were saying just money in, money out. I'm surprised that those two figures match. That 120k for how come they match?
It was looking, I mean, the saving was in the proposal for the 120k. Discussions with the service, they felt rather than include that saving, because the detail hadn't been worked up, but they came back to us saying that they would be able to manage that within the overall service budget. And there was, because the estimate in terms of the pressure is an estimate, so they felt they were able to manage that within the envelope that they've got.
Okay, and if the demographic pressures are not as predicted or forecast, and it is greater than the sum allocated, where would that money
Again, that would be part of the overall general risk in any budget. We have a risk budget set up, and that will be managed in the same way as all pressures in the budget are as we move through next financial year.
Okay,
So we keep it under constant review.
Hopefully you'll stay within the service, and the service can manage the pressure, but ultimately it could mean a draw on potential reserves, or one of them.
It could be a draw on the risk budget. So we have a £3 million risk budget included in the budget plan, and that is where any sort of change in the budget, that's why it's there, to manage that risk in the overall budget.
Okay, thank you, Jane. Councillor Pete, and then Councillor John Bronte.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm sorry. Oops. Sorry, I didn't realise we moved on to number 2 there, Chair.
Oh, no, apologies. You go back and make your point.
Yeah, no, I was basically going to raise and reiterate probably the point that you just made. I think I'll just probably try and tease this out a little bit more for myself. Is if I'm understanding this, there was originally an estimate for £120,000 savings. That was put in as a potential saving, but now until a review's taken place, we don't think that saving is possible. So that's sort of slightly confused me. And I suppose, as well as in this particular instance, just again, as you were saying, you know, the okie-dokie element of in and out, it just makes me wonder if there are other areas across the whole budget that we haven't looked at, where there might be similar things like this, that there isn't enough information or backup on potential savings. So I don't know if there's any more behind that Jane could perhaps help me with.
I think in terms of this specific saving, it's based on a review being undertaken. So as I said, you know, in terms of any budget plan, everything is an estimate at the beginning of the year, but you have more certainty around those things because this was reliant on a review that hasn't happened yet. I think that's why it was felt in terms of that level of certainty was probably a little bit higher.
So just sorry, just might be being a little bit thick. So within the budgets, then there's lots of estimates around potential savings and things like this, but this one particular element, we did a bit more of a detailed review now.
But that review hasn't been completed yet.
But that review's still not been done. Right.
Yeah, and that's why it's more risky than other elements.
Okay.
Yes, there's potential savings and there's potential pressures as well. And that's part of my concern, that various services highlight potential pressures, and as in this example, it's sort of evaporated. But
Can I just come in there, please, Chair?
yes, certainly, David.
I just think it's worth remembering with regard to item 2 there with £120,000 older day provision review. That came out of the Health and Care Scrutiny Committee. It was one of the points that they picked up, and they asked the service to relook at that, and this is the result of that scrutiny. That item's already been scrutinised, and that proposal is the results coming out of it. Thank you.
Yes, yeah, but it wasn't the Scrutiny Committee that highlighted the potential over provision within the demographic pressures highlighted by adult social care, was it?
No, that was the service.
Yeah. John, welcome, John. I didn't welcome you at the beginning.
Thank you, Elliot.
I understand.
Can you hear me?
I understand the chair of the audit committee cannot be here today, so welcome to you.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Fine. Yeah, I'm really following up from what Councillor David just said there. This review, is it about the whole of the demographic assumptions being made, or is it just specifically around this particular year? I'm intrigued that you know, such pressures have been put forward into next year as well, and have they been overestimated?
This is, sorry if I can come in, the saving is what was challenged, John. It was the 120,000 because the review has been undertaken. So this is about a specific review of an area of service.
Yeah, doesn't it imply that there are fewer clients coming forward in this current year, which is almost ended?
It can be, or it can be the level of support and the hours of support. So it would be quite a complex calculation in terms of a pressure. Yeah. I'm just wondering whether you know, the review is going to indicate that we've over budgeted for or over provisioned for next year as well. It's the review is relating to the potential saving for the service, not the pressure.
Okay, thank you. Understand.
Thank you, John. Chris. Good afternoon, Chris.
Can you hear me okay? Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you. I think, Jane, you must be relieved that you're giving us positive news for one occasion, of saying that the financial position is improving. So that's encouraging, and that on there, because that makes a change, because obviously it has been challenging times, and I'm sure we'll have those again. Again, just to flag up, the issue of the 122,000, I think, was picked up by the Health Scrutiny Committee, and because there wasn't the review done, that's why it was then flagged, and that was right and proper. Until that review's done, we don't know. So it's better to take it out than leave it in, because it's given you a false expectation of the bottom line. So that's sensible. And in relation to the other question around the economy, community and residents one, with the savings there, the impact assessment has been done. I have seen it. I've tried to look for it, but I can't find it because there's so many different documents I've got open today. But it was there, and it has been scrutinised, and they've given the assurances, because I've just come from that committee, to give that reassurance. So I think, you know, from my perspective as a new councillor, I think this is now starting to make a lot more sense. I think congratulations should be going on, because we've had so many challenges coming in, Chair, that to get a budget which is starting to look more sensible going forward, and also keeping, you know, control around what the rate of council tax going up is credit to the team. So from my perspective, I think it's good news, and it appears more positive.
Thank you very much, Chris. I don't expect you want a response to that, but and it is important to highlight the good work of the finance officers and all the services across the board. It's always a huge amount of work, and as soon as this budget's put to bed, it'll be next year's budget. So things never end. So thank you, Chris, for highlighting all the good work that goes on within the service, various services across the council. And any other questions to portfolio holders or the finance team, in other words, Jane? So are we happy to leave it there? I will try and dig out the impact assessment and see what difference that potential of 120k makes. Oh, sorry, 191k, sorry, isn't it? 191k makes to the HDR, but I'll seek that out, but it wasn't in the papers I received. Right, and no other questions to either officers or cabinet members? Right, brilliant, thank you. Just looking at the overall proposed amendments, what are the comments, recommendation that flow out of this? Any status for 10? No. I could get on my old hobby horse about the use of reserves to balance off one year savings, but we don't have that detail yet. And so it's difficult or impossible to make that judgment until you see what that 500k for schools is being spent on. Clearly there's some reserves being used to bolster that sum of money, even though it's come via quite a...
Yeah, there's no reserves being used to establish that 500,000.
I'd say the 287 is...
That's revenue budget.
From this current year?
No, from next year. It was part of the base budget plan.
Oh, sorry, which?
The 287.
Also, it's not a 1.1 million pound increase now to Freedom Leisure next year. It's 1.1 million minus 287.
No, the 287 isn't coming from reserve. It was going to replenish reserves, but it was base budget. Sorry, perhaps I've misunderstood your question.
Okay, but some money had been drawn from reserves.
But we're not going to be drawing from reserves to support that now.
Okay.
So that's why it doesn't need to replenish reserves.
Okay. But the 1.1 underspend of in this current financial year is partly due to the use of reserves, isn't it? Specific reserves. Specific
reserves are being drawn on, as I said,
yes.
And those were set aside at the end of last year's outturn, in response to the inflationary pressures that we'll be seeing coming through.
Yes. Okay. Okay. Yeah, which way? Okay. David.
Thank you, Chair. And I was basically going to reiterate what Jane has already said. My understanding is that the £287,000 was coming out of the reserves this year, and it's going to be replaced next year, but that won't be required now because of the improved outturn after Q3. Okay. And there is an expectation that the outturn, that improved outturn, will continue into Q4.
Okay.
Thank you.
So the budget sets this time last year was adequate to deal with all the pressures within the council's experience over the last 12 months.
Well, the budget was set has proved to be adequate, but there's also credit got to be given to the way that heads of service have managed the budget, because the financial pressures that they faced have been pretty well, something we've not experienced for at least 40, 50 years. So I think, we can't allow it to just be said that the budget was appropriate. I think we have to add to that it's a credit to heads of service the way they managed it, and under incredibly difficult circumstances, because what was built into the budget for inflationary pressures in particular was totally inadequate. But yet again, I'll accept that the previous cabinet weren't to be aware that they were going to face inflationary pressures of 10%.
But there's the expected surplus on the budget of £1 million this year.
Yes, that's after absorbing all these different pressures. And I think that's a credit to the service heads of service, because there wasn't adequate, initially there wasn't adequate budget built in for the inflationary pressures they've had to face. And that's to their credit.
Spend was pulled back, wasn't it, during the year in response to those pressures that we were seeing. So many people held vacancies or didn't spend on specific items as expected when the budget was set, and that was all in response to trying to minimise the use on reserves as we move through the year, which is what we've done.
Okay, Councillor Peat.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Jane may have slightly answered it there, but just picking up on Councillor David's comments as well, and sort of saying how well we've done with all the pressures we've faced, and also the excellent performances of the heads of the services. I just wondered, from my point of interest perspective, was there anything specific in that Q3 budget report where the position was improved, or was there one particular thing that improved the position so dramatically, or was it a combination of things?
I think, and I can't remember the exact figures, but there was, I think there was 3 services highlighted more so. I think children's services were one, and I'm trying to remember the other 2. But if you refer back to that Q3 report, it is specific. There were 3 quite significant changes that really helped that position.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, the largest improvements were in children's services and social care commissioning.
Thank you.
Thank you. Chris.
Yeah, I mean, I said it before, I mean, around reflections now of going forward, I think it's credit to everyone that's got a balanced position now when looking at the budget on there. And I think it has been recognised by Councillor David saying about, credit goes to the service and the service heads for delivering on some of the pressures that they've had. I think is a credit, particularly when we're facing such unprecedented, times on there. So for me, I think it's looking healthy, and as I mentioned before, it's nice when Jane's able to come on and give us an improved position, and rather than looking at it as the glass being half empty, we should be looking at it as being half full on there. So I think well done to everyone.
Thank you, Chris. Right. Oh no, sorry. Old hand. Right. Thank you, Chris. If there are no more comments from cabinet members or senior officers in this meeting, I'll draw the meeting to a close. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks.